Now I've got the U.S. Senator from Connecticut, Chris Murphy. Thanks so much for coming back on.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me.
You were the lead negotiator for the border bill for the Democrats, working with Senators Lankford and Sinema. So first things first here, is this bill dead, or what can we expect from here?
I think this bill is dead. We worked for 4 months on a fix to the broken immigration and system and the border, which on many days is just not manageable by this president. It was a true compromise, right? It had some very tough conservative measures to try to get the border under control, including allowing the president to, temporarily suspend taking asylum applications on days where too many people are crossing, but also had some good things for, progressives and immigrants, including earlier work permits when you cross and more visas to allow people into the country faster. But Republicans ran for the hills. Ultimately, within hours of the bill's introduction, the 20 to 25 Republicans that we thought would vote for it all declared that they hated the bill. And for one reason only, Donald Trump told them to hate the bill because the party wants to maintain chaos at the border. They don't want to fix the problem. They just want to use immigration and the border as a political wedge issue in the next election. And I wish that were the reality. I wish they wanted to fix the problem, but they don't.
Well, to that exact point, Republicans have now rejected bipartisan border bills in 2006, 2014, 2018, and now in 2024. So is this just going to continue to persist? Are they going to continue to do everything they can to just preserve this as an issue, even if it's nakedly apparent to the whole world?
Well, that's the wild thing, is that everybody sees what happened here, right? This was a bipartisan bill that Republicans demanded. Last fall, Republicans said, we will not vote for Ukraine aid unless you come up with a bipartisan border bill. And we're going to tell you who to negotiate the bill with. James Lankford, very conservative Republican from Oklahoma. He's going to drive a hard bargain. He did drive a hard bargain. Mitch McConnell came to the room. He was part of the negotiation. So we announced last weekend a bipartisan border bill that was negotiated by James Lankford, hardline conservative Republican, and Mitch McConnell, and no Republican would support it. Everybody knows what's happening here. Donald Trump came out against the bill. Donald Trump said, I can't imagine winning this election if the border isn't a mess, and so keep the border a mess because it helps me. I actually think this flips the politics of the border. I think this probably was going to be a tough issue for Democrats. I think it's a much less tough issue now because we have a bipartisan bill that would have controlled the border. Republicans are against it only because they actually don't want to fix the problem, and they kind of admitted it in front of everybody.
Does it kind of hurt them doubly in the sense that because these are the same people who have said that this issue is so urgent, the border is so dangerous, there's drugs and rapists and fentanyl and everything coming across, and so this is the number one issue we should focus on. The fact that they're now preserving the status quo to your exact point, is that what you and Democrats intend to harp on moving toward November?
Yeah, all of a sudden, Democrats are the party that are serious about fixing the border, right? We came up with a bill to give the president tough new authority to be able to temporarily slow down the number of people who cross. We came up with a bill to shorten the asylum approval process from 10 years, which is way too long to get an asylum claim processed and allows a lot of people to game the system, down to 6 months. Democrats are the party that want to fix the border. Republicans are the party that reject those ideas and are very happy with the border staying open. So listen, I'm counseling my Democratic colleagues, those that are on the ballot, including the president, to go on offense on the issue of the border and immigration. Of course, we're a pro-immigration party. We still believe that you need to keep legal pathways open to come to this country. But we also believe that there should be law and order on the border. We're the only party that seems to be willing to vote for a bill that does that.
Well, Tim Scott came forward and scoffed at the very notion that we would ever link foreign aid and a border bill. And the irony of that is that it was Republicans' idea to do exactly that in the beginning. That's why you spent the last 4 months working on this bill in the first place. But now the Senate has already advanced just recently a foreign aid only bill, and they opened that up for debate. So what's happening here? Are we ending up at the same exact bill that was initially a non-starter for Republicans and now going back to the initial Democratic priority of a foreign aid only bill?
So I used to defend Senate Republicans back in my state in Connecticut. I'd say, listen, the House Republicans are just a dumpster fire. They're a disaster under the thumb of Trump. Senate Republicans, I disagree with them on a lot of things, but they're a little bit more normal, a little bit more regular, more functional. Not true anymore. Not true anymore. The Senate Republicans are just as big a disaster as the House Republicans, and this whole episode is evidence of that. So yes, this played out exactly as you just said. In the fall, we wanted to pass aid for Ukraine. We wanted to make sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't win this war. Republicans said, well, we support that, but we're not going to vote for what we support unless you come up with a bipartisan border bill and put the two together. And we're going to tell you who to negotiate with. We did that. We negotiated the bill. We released the text. And literally within a day of releasing the text, they were like, it's a terrible idea to tie border security and Ukraine together. We want a straight vote on Ukraine, which we just gave them. It just passed with 14 Republican votes. We're moving towards final passage. And it looks like we are going to approve through the Senate a clean bill providing aid to Ukraine, something we could have done back in the fall if they hadn't made us go through this exercise. And Brian, the last thing I'll say about this, it's such a weird political decision for them because the outcome is the same that we would have gotten last fall. We are going to approve in the Senate money for Ukraine. But now the whole country knows that they are frauds on the issue of immigration. And so they have just lost the issue of immigration as pungent a political issue as they thought it was going to be in the November elections.
Right. I mean, all they did was delink the border, which is the issue that, again, to my earlier point, was apparently so important that nothing could move forward without. So important that HR 2, their top priority in the House, was getting some legislation for the border, and now everything is going to move forward except the one thing that they claimed was that urgent. So,
yeah, and again, it's evidence that it's actually not that urgent for them. That for the Republican Party, they can't live in a world in which the border or the immigration system is better. I mean, they just, like, what would they do on the weekend, right? If they couldn't run
right.
down to the border with reporters and put on pretend camouflage and act like they're border patrol agents. Right. Like, that's like what they do with their free time. If the border wasn't a mess, they, literally would, sit on the couch all day.
Right. Well, I think the issue of abortion are also kind of didn't redound to their benefit to the extent that now they're seeing what happens when the dog catches the car. And so, they loved to have the issue of abortion to fearmonger and rile up their base to get them to go vote. Abortion was overturned. It all of a sudden turned out not to be such a great issue for the Republicans at the ballot box. And they're like, you know what, we have to preserve this issue because when we actually get what we want, it doesn't really end up working out too well for us.
Yeah, and listen, it's always amazing to me how many issues Republicans are on the deeply unpopular side, whether it be abortion or guns or taxes. Republicans occupy the position that has the support of the minority of Americans. Arguably on the border, they held a position, get tough, that was more popular than Democrats' position,
yeah.
which for Democrats was often to defend, probably too reflexively, the current situation at the border. They've lost that advantage because now, after this bill that was supported by 90% of Democrats, we're the party that is saying, hey, listen, time to get tough on the border, time to clean this mess up. And Republicans are the ones that are saying, it's not that important. We'd rather just keep it the way it is. So even on this one issue where they might have been on the sort of the right side of public opinion, they've lost that advantage.
Going back to Ukraine aid, I think it's framed very frequently as a Democratic priority, but it's actually a small d Democratic priority because I mean, think about what would happen if down the line, if Russia were to beat Ukraine and then attack a NATO country and then drag the U.S. into war. I mean, this is kind of protecting us for what could happen in the future. Now that debate has begun on the issue of a foreign aid only bill, do you think that there's a realistic possibility that this could actually pass the Senate?
I think it's going to pass the Senate this weekend. We've begun debate. We got 14 Republicans, which are enough to break a filibuster to begin debate. I expect that enough of those Republicans will join us when it's time to end debate. I agree with you that we've got to do a better job of explaining to people what the consequences are of Russia winning the war in Ukraine. We've kind of gotten used to this post-World War II world in which big countries don't expand their boundaries by invading smaller countries. But anybody who remembers their high school history knows that this is how the world worked all the time. And the United States got dragged into 2 world wars in order to defend our friends from foreign invasions. That will start again. That era will recommence because it's not just Russia that wants to keep moving. China wants to expand their boundaries as well. So if you don't stand up for a little country like Ukraine, or I guess it's not that little, but for a friend like Ukraine right now, you will be sooner than later at war with another big power, and it will be thousands of American young men and women who are dying. This is just a smart, relatively small investment in global security and ultimately in American security.
And by the way, even if the moral incentive isn't strong enough here, there's also a really strong economic incentive because people may think it's expensive to help Ukraine now, but imagine how expensive it would be if the world is engrossed in another war, not just in terms of how much we would have to spend just on the war effort, but just what would happen to the global economy if another war broke out.
Well, and already, you've seen the impact of this war. Part of the story of inflation is the story of, a big part of the world's food supply chain being interrupted in Ukraine and in Russia. So, listen, I'm not saying it's certain that if Putin wins the war in Ukraine, that he will move on to a NATO country. But I think it is certainly inside the Overton window. It is possible. And man, we do not want to be in our lifetime's first ever direct confrontation between 2 nuclear powers.
Going back to just the way the Senate is working right now, honestly, what is the incentive to try and pass legislation in the Senate? Because Lankford was condemned by his own state party. He was vilified on right-wing media. Like, how does another senator see that and voluntarily be the next guy to want to stick their neck out only to get beat up over it?
Listen, Lankford, was heroic right into the end. He and I disagree on a lot of big issues, but he only had 4 Republicans voting for the compromise that they asked him to write. And he still, up until the end, defended the thing, voted for it. No, I think between now and the election, it is going to be very hard to get Republicans to agree to any compromise because they've been folded into the Trump political operation at this point. And so I think we have to accept that, with very, very limited exceptions, it's going to be hard to get Republicans to break away from Trump from here to the election, which sucks. I hate that the election lasts this long. I hate that Trump has so much influence over the party, but it is the reality.
And so at this point, we've already seen historically like unproductive Congress. Is it just going to pretty much be the status quo from here, knowing that any effort to move toward compromise on anything at this point is basically viewed as a capitulation to Democrats or a win for Joe Biden as far as the Republicans are concerned?
Well, and even if we had remained functional in the Senate, the House is obviously non-functional. The same day that we were losing the Republican support for the bipartisan border bill, the House was failing in its efforts to impeach Mayorkas. It couldn't get votes for Speaker Johnson's priority bill to fund Israel. So it almost doesn't matter what happens here in the Senate because the place where every policy issue is going to go die is the House of Representatives. And we've kind of become a little normalized to the House being this out of control. Like never before in American history, with the possible exception of the lead up to the Civil War, has the House been this out of control. And I hope that is part of the calculation that voters are going to make. Like, this is an embarrassment, regardless of whether you're a Republican or Democrat. The way the House is operating today is just a particular embarrassment to the whole country.
Well, let's finish off with this, and this is to that exact point. Do you believe that at least this foreign aid package that's making its way through the Senate right now, that you just said that you believe is going to pass the Senate, do you have any idea of how its prospects would fare in the House?
It's possible that it could pass the House. There's this tool that you have in the House called the discharge petition. You can take a bill that the Speaker doesn't want to call up for a vote, and you can force a vote on it if you get the majority of members signing a petition. Now, Republicans have not used that tactic before. but there is a small rump group of pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia Republicans. There's a handful of them left.
Yeah.
And it's possible that they could take our bill, if it passes with a big bipartisan vote in the Senate, and use that discharge position to force a vote in the House. There's just no question that the votes would exist in the House to pass this. I mean, if Speaker Johnson took our bill, if it passes the Senate, I think it will, put it on the floor of the Senate for a vote, floor of the House for a vote, it would pass. Yeah. If he doesn't, that discharge petition might force his hand.
Well, we'll leave it there. I think I speak for everybody in saying that even though it was a futile exercise, we appreciate the work that you've done for these last few months, if for nothing else than to just expose the Republicans' hypocrisy on this issue. So with that said, Senator, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks, man.